Opium syrups. While nowadays it's entirely normal for babies to get fussy when they get uncomfortable, hungry, or sleepy, parents back in the ancient times didn't think so. Instead of trying to figure out why their little kids were restless and crying all the time, or maybe sing them a lullaby, they would come in with a little bottle of syrup and pour a couple of ounces of opium-laced syrup down the baby's throat. Because nothing says sleep tight like a narcotic nightcap. Yeah, opium is a highly addictive substance that can cause extreme side effects and dependence even with grown adults. Now, that's essentially what parents in the early 20th century were told to do whenever their fussy baby had a bad case of the crankies. After all, who needs a lullaby when you've got liquid opium? Drugstores were filled with varieties of the soothing syrup as a cure for teething pain, fever, and other infant ailments, so parents turned to them as the solution to putting their babies to sleep. You pour your baby some opium syrup, which was taken quite too literally because the babies became addicted to the opium syrups. Most suffered from an overdose and eventually died. It wasn't until the early 20th century that people began to realize the dangers of giving their babies opium syrup. Then laws and regulations were put in place, and gradually these soothing liquids slowly disappeared from the shelves, much to the relief of babies and their livers. Spider webs as bandages. It was just another random Tuesday afternoon with you playing outside with your friends. Suddenly you trip over a rock and hurt your knees really bad. The injury starts bleeding profusely and mom rushes out, but instead of a first aid kit, she's grabbing the spider webs that have been at your front entrance for weeks now. Apparently those webs were the very first natural first aid wound dressing and were used by our forefathers to treat injuries. The belief here was that since spider webs could trap flies, dust, and small insects, they could also trap the blood or pus from an open wound. With this conclusion, ancient Greek doctors would gently weave a freshly spun spider web over wounds or sore spots, press it down tightly, and wait for the web to absorb everything. It turns out that what's good for catching flies is also good for catching, well, blood and pus. While it seemed weird to apply spider webs to open cuts or wounds, they had natural antiseptic and antifungal properties to keep the wounds clean and prevent infections. Hence, this practice was not so crazy and actually stuck around for decades. Well, now you know that spiders are not just for Halloween decorations anymore. Animal dung ointments. It might seem wild to you now, but animal dung was the OG natural skincare treatment for centuries. Skin rashes? Apply cow poop. Have a breakout? A generous coating of sheep's dung was your answer. They believed that since animal dung made their plants grow lushly and vibrantly, the vitamin-packed dung minerals could do wonders for the skin. And just like you have different skincare products for other body parts, different types of dung were equally used for different skin ailments. So if you were experiencing hair loss or baldness, pigeon droppings were your favorite hair cream, and dog poop was strictly prescribed for sore throat. So technically, people were just eating the animal shit under the belief that crap was pure nourishment. Radioactive remedies. It's the 20th century when cancers and tumors were still quite mysterious and very difficult to treat, so doctors began exploring various unconventional approaches. Then a certain doctor, Arthur Roberts, decided to use radioactive substances to shrink the tumors, which we now know can cause radiation sickness and genetic mutations, but at the time, the potential benefits seemed to outweigh the risks. Soon enough, radioactive substances became the bread and butter for treating every illness. People put it in everything from their toothpaste to tea, chocolates, and even ice cream. And as if soaking up their insides with chemicals equivalent to a nuclear bomb wasn't enough, someone came up with a radium-laden elixir called the Radithor. This new potion was guaranteed to cure everything under the sun, and people just went crazy about it. A famous victim of Radithor was Eber Byers, a wealthy American socialite and athlete who drank so much of it that his jaw literally fell off his mouth. He died of several cancers in 1932 and was buried in a lead-lined coffin, but when he was exhumed in 1965, his remains were still radioactive. People soon realized that using their bodies as a dumping site for radioactive substances is as ill-advised as detonating a bomb in a residential area, so they stopped this remedy. Fecal transplant. The idea here is that taking poop from a healthy person and putting it into the intestine of a sick person would make them feel better. The scientific fact behind it is that the poop from a healthy person has a ton of good bacteria that the ill person lacks, so transferring all those beneficial germs from one intestine to another can help restore the proper balance in the recipient's digestive system. Think of a fecal transplant as the ultimate gastrointestinal matchmaking service. It's like setting up a blind date between your gut bacteria and someone else's, hoping they hit it off. Doctors were literally transferring poop from a healthy person's body to the intestines of the sick patient using a practice known as yellow soup. It basically involved the sick person drinking the watery poop of the healthy donor as treatment for food poisoning and diarrhea. As disgusting as this may seem, it is still a standard medical practice in today's world to treat a variety of infections. Thankfully, the drinking of yellow soup has been modified, and now doctors use more hygienic methods, like enemas. Cauterisation with hot irons. You might have seen this play out in a lot of movies, where the main character sustains a deep cut, but there's no hospital or medical kit around to stop his bleeding, so he quickly makes a fire, takes out a small knife, and places it over the fire until it's glowing red from the intense heat, which he then places on his wounds to seal it shut and stop the bleeding as he yells in agony. That familiar movie scene is cauterization, and back in the day, it was the standard way to treat specific injuries and skin conditions. The purpose of cauterization is to cook wounds shut and seal off any bleeding, or to burn off warts or other growths on the skin by charring them away. While undoubtedly extremely painful and primitive by today's standards, cauterization was one of the only effective methods surgeons had before modern tools and antiseptics to stop bleeding and remove diseased tissue. The intense dry heat did successfully keep wounds shut. Tobacco enema. It's 1986 and you're just having a really bad day. Your cat died and you just got fired from your job, so you head to the local bar to get some alcohol or an energy drink to lighten up your mood, but instead you're asked to lie on your tummy while someone starts to blow tobacco smoke up your butt through your bumhole. The point of this mind-boggling treatment was that the tobacco smoke would stimulate the intestinal lining to restore your mood and make you feel alive. That was not the end of it though. Apparently, blowing tobacco up a person's ass could also be used to treat colds, cholera, and even revive those who are unconscious. Although it may not have been the tobacco smoke improving their mood, but the fact that someone was actively opening up their bums to insert a tube and blow smoke in. Corpse medicine. For some time now, Sarah has been experiencing the worst type of migraines, and after a really bad episode, she finally takes a visit to her doctor's office. After diagnosis, the doctor heads straight to the local morgue and cuts off the left finger and big toe of a freshly deceased corpse to mix and prepare Sarah's medicine. Yup, mixing the flesh and blood of dead people for medicine was a very standard practice for the people living in ancient Europe. The central idea behind this practice was the belief that freshly decomposed corpses still had power and vitality in them, so naturally they thought, why waste good material? Ancient doctors would basically crush up different body parts from dead people, add blood to the mixture, and your healing potion was ready to go. Now, it was very typical during this time to see people fighting to collect the blood of freshly exhumed criminals because they believed that drinking the blood of a strong man could make them strong. It's basically an ancient version of a protein shake. Toad vomit therapy. Well, we have the water therapy, food therapy, and then there's the toad vomit therapy. And its name is precisely what it sounds like. For starters, doctors in ancient times didn't have a lot of experience or medical books to go by, so medicine was essentially a lot of trial and error. And this practice was one heck of a trial and a huge error. Now, the rationale behind this treatment was that consuming poison in small amounts would cure people's sickness. Since toads were very poisonous animals, the doctors decided they would be the scapegoats. Well, it turns out making a toad vomit isn't as simple as saying boo. To extract the poison, they had to get the toads to vomit, and getting those slippery amphibians to puke was no easy task, so the doctors had to hang them upside down and then force feed them to induce vomiting. They were so convinced that this treatment was the ultimate cure that it was even used to treat people during the Black Plague. Well, that wasn't very smart because feeding poison to people who already had a very weakened immune system led to more infections and poisoning, so the death tolls just kept increasing, and this strange practice has proven to be ineffective. Bat blood remedy. Desperate times called for desperate measures, and what's more desperate than drinking the blood of a bat as a last resort to get better? Let's say you consider the idea that you could gain a superhero's powers just by drinking their favorite smoothie. That's pretty much what was going on with the bat blood remedy. The people drinking the bat's blood believed that bats were powerful creatures because they could fly and navigate at night with ease, so it was concluded that by consuming the animal's blood they would ingest the powerful essence that gave the bat its special abilities like night vision and being able to hang upside down. So it was common for people back then to use bat blood as a treatment for any sort of blindness and to improve their eyesight. The blood was also a hot commodity because they believed that bats carried many viruses and made them resistant to viral illnesses like hepatitis, rabies, and malaria. Mummy powder. If you suffered any ailment in ancient Egypt, the chances of you drinking crushed up dead bones were very high. This is because the people in ancient Egypt simply believed that dead bones had magical powers and that drinking them could cure anything. It is practically like the one and all drug slots for sickness. So if you have a headache, toothache, or even an epileptic seizure, the doctors would exhume the bones of a dead mummy, grind it into fine dust, mix the whole thing with water, and feed it to you. Interestingly, they also believed that certain body parts cured specific symptoms. So let's say you have a migraine. You wouldn't be given a crushed leg, but the crushed skull of a mummified pharaoh. Soon enough, the healing powers of dead bones spread far and wide and became a very lucrative business for anybody willing to dig up dead people's graves and get the bones. Still, eventually, the practice died out, as many people began to realize that they were practicing cannibalism. Electric fish therapy. Medieval doctors tried to relieve people's pains by administering bolts of shock from an electric fish, and this bizarre medical treatment started after some people reported feeling relief after getting accidentally shocked by the fish while swimming. Hey, I feel better! Rather than, I might need a new swimming spot. Talk about getting a charge out of healthcare. So they bought into the story and started capturing electric fish for treatment. So if you complained about knee pain or headache, they'd just fish one out of the aquarium and shock you back to health. The electric shock treatment was used to treat gout, limb paralysis, and a whole host of disorders, believing that the shock from the fish would course through a person's nerves and muscles and jolt them back to health. Yeah, that didn't work. Rather than jolting dead muscle back to life, the jolt caused multiple shocks that led to heart and respiratory failure, a typical case of moving from the frying pan to the fire. We are sure you didn't know that joining our Discord would be another excellent alternative treatment for your health and mood. Well, now you know, so join our Discord to get all the effective treatment you'll need. Pliny the Elder remedies. This whole practice started a long time ago when a certain Roman naturalist and philosopher appropriately named Pliny the Elder compiled all his life's work in a book called Naturalis Historia. The book contained thousands of plant, animal, and mineral cures and remedies for treating various illnesses. A few examples of these remedies are hyena soup for fertility. For couples who are unable to give birth, Pliny books recommend making stew with the genitals of a hyena and then eating the soup. This remedy is based on Pliny's belief that hyenas could become pregnant through their mouth. Powder from ancient spider's web was described as a treatment for contagious fever. You were expected to find the web of an ancient spider, burn it, and lick the powdery ash. As odd as these few examples of Pliny the Elder's remedies may seem to you now, back then, people trusted these kinds of natural, homemade concoctions to help their ailments. However, in reality, it often made their problem even worse or even killing them. Mustard gas treatment. Doctors in the olden days were so convinced that administering small amounts of poison to people who were already sick was the best approach to getting them to feel better. Now, this idea led them to expose people to mustard gas, a very poisonous chemical that was initially made to be used as a weapon. This gas was so toxic that it caused terrible burns and made breathing very hard. But of course, ancient doctors ignored all the red flags and started using the gas as a treatment for people who had tumors. Patients with cancer were asked to inhale small amounts of this gas with the hopes that they would target the tumors and burn them off. It was not a very smart idea idea because the gas burnt everything it came in contact with, including all the healthy cells, which made them sicker. Aside from that, the poor patients would get chemical burns all over their bodies, and it was a harrowing experience. After trying this awful idea for a while, the doctors finally realized mustard gas was just way too toxic and dangerous to ever use as a treatment because no matter how small the dose was, it still caused a lot of harm.